There it was, a quiet night in a suburban neighborhood, the kind where the biggest turmoil might be a neighbor arguing over a lawn. But suddenly, there came the unmistakable sound of shattering glass, and at that moment everything changed. In the heart of the night, three figures crept through the shadows, eyes darting, hearts racing. These weren't just any intruders, they were seasoned thieves, convinced they were about to pull off the heist of a lifetime. They had been watching the house for weeks, mapping out its vulnerabilities, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Easy pickings, they thought, the soft glow of the porch light luring them like moths to a flame. They slipped through the broken window, unaware of the eyes watching from the darkness just beyond the living room. Inside, the house had an unsettling silence, broken only by the creaking of old floorboards beneath their rush of adrenaline. They felt invincible, but that confidence was about to be shattered. The leader, a man with shaggy hair named Jake, whispered, "You grab the electronics. I'll take care of the jewelry." The excitement drove them forward, blinded by their greed. But what they didn't know was that just a few feet away, a soft alarm panel lay hidden beneath a dusty table, a security system, dormant for now but ready to unleash chaos. As the intruders ransacked the living room, tossing aside cushions and upending cabinets, the house's real owner, Sarah, was sound asleep upstairs, completely unaware of the danger lurking below. But Sarah wasn't just any homeowner. She was a retired police officer, a woman who had walked the thin blue line long enough to know how to stay calm when the unexpected hit. As the intruders began to find small treasures, a gaming console, an expensive set of headphones, each discovery fueled their arrogance. Jake felt like he was on top of the world, picturing himself selling the items, spending the money like it was already in his pocket. The moment felt electric, the thrill almost intoxicating. But every action has a consequence, and the consequences of their recklessness were about to crash down like a tidal wave. Then came the piercing sound, clear as day. A shrill beep emanated from the security panel. The intruders froze. Whispered Marcus, the nervous member of the group. Jake's bravado faltered for a split second, but he quickly shook it off. He urged, pushing his friends deeper into the house. But Sarah's instincts were kicking in, arms tense with alertness. Meanwhile, Sarah stirred in her sleep, the faintest trace of worry creeping into her dreams. The familiar protectiveness from her years on the force kicked in. She pulled out her phone, hesitated briefly before dialing 911. This wasn't one of those action-packed moments you'd see in movies. This was real life, grounded and unfiltered. Nervously, she gave the dispatcher a short description of the situation, her voice calm but her heart beating wildly. Outside, the night felt heavy with tension. The sirens echoed in the distance, a warning bell summoning the forces of order. Meanwhile, the intruders had tossed aside the rest of the living room and were now in the kitchen, rifling through drawers and cabinets like wild animals. They were becoming increasingly frantic, glancing over their shoulders, fear gnawing at their bravado. A momentary lapse caught Jake's eye. He spotted a glimmer beneath a pile of papers. Ignoring the thoughts of escape, he lunged forward, uncovering a sparkling bracelet, the kind that looked so expensive it could probably feed a family for a month. Just as he started to pocket it, the sound of sirens grew closer, a bellowing wake-up call that sent icy fingers of panic down his spine. "Guys, we need to go." Jake shouted, urgency slicing through the haze of adrenaline. But the exit was not just a few steps away, as they soon found out. Just as they turned to rush back, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed from the front door. Heavy, quick, a team of officers were closing in. As if frozen in time, they shared panicked glances. It dawned on them, they were trapped. Just moments earlier, they had imagined their getaway, and now it felt more like a chase scene out of a movie. The shadowy figures of officers filtered in, their flashlights cutting through the dark, creating a surreal dance of light and shadows. One of the officers shouted, commanding them to stop. The weight of reality was sinking in. They were about to become the hunted. Jake, thinking quickly, turned to his friends. He shouted, but it was too late. The officers were covering all the exits, the net tightening around them. Inside the home, Sarah stood at the top of the stairs, her heart pounding fiercely in her chest, but her resolve was crystal clear. She could hear the scuffling below, the noise of chaos and desperation. And in that moment, she knew she had to do something. Reaching for her old service weapon safe in its hiding place, she took a deep breath and made her way down. The panicked intruders, fueled by fear, began to sabotage each other's escape. Caught between fleeing and fighting, they became a tangled mess of self-doubt. Jake slipped and fell, knocking over a shelf that sent a cascade of glass tumbling down. It was as if the universe was conspiring against their heist. Every move was backfiring, every plan unraveling. Suddenly, he caught sight of Sarah, her figure bathed in the harsh, fluorescent light of the officers behind her. The calm demeanor exuded from her felt like an impenetrable wall, a reminder that their dreams of quick riches were rapidly morphing into a nightmare. Marcus, caught off guard, stumbled backward into a room that was not just a storage closet but also a well-guarded lair of forgotten memories. The family's prized collection of art, untouched and sacred. In an attempt to claw his way toward freedom, he grabbed a figurine, always underestimating the weight of the situation, believing he could just run away with some semblance of victory. The barrage of footsteps grew louder, the officers moving like a well-oiled machine, closing in on their targets. Panic painted their faces as they faced the unexpected someone ready to confront them, someone who knew their way around the dark. And that's when the unthinkable happened. Just as they were about to flee through a back door, Sarah descended the last step and words sprang from her lips. "Stop right there." The force in her voice stunned them, a raw power rising from years of responsibility. Surrounded, the trio paused, their survival instincts forcing reality into focus. They were no longer the hunters, but the hunted. The room felt thick, heavy with their regrets and insecurities. Their eyes darted toward each other, realization dawning. This heist, driven by a sense of entitlement, had pushed them into a corner from which there was no escape. Jake tried to muster the courage to charge, but it was as if time had frozen, weighing heavily on them. Each heartbeat echoed, reminding them this was not just about stolen goods. This was about their freedom. As the officers moved in, handcuffs gleaming in the cold light, the intruders realized how far they'd fallen from their expectations. They had thought it would be easy, a quick burglary, ample rewards, minimal risk. But the truth is always harder than fiction. The thrill of the chase turned into the horror of consequence, and they were left standing helpless, caught in their own web of fear. Eventually, they were escorted outside, the sting of defeat heavy and bitter. The flashing lights caught their expressions, a blend of shame and disbelief. The neighborhood returned to silence, but the echoes of that fateful night rippled through the lives of everyone involved. As the doors to the police vehicle closed behind them, they felt the weight of reality crashing down. The night they thought would bring them glory had instead closed the door on opportunity and opened a new chapter of regret. And amidst all this, Sarah stood tall, breathing a sigh of relief. The quiet neighborhood was safe again, and her heart, once heavy with worry, was now full of gratitude. A night that began with fear transformed into a tale of resilience, reminding us all that courage often comes when we least expect it, when we find strength within ourselves to protect and to serve. The intruders had thought it would be easy, but in a single moment of bravery and resolve, their plans crumbled, leaving them with nothing but a bitter lesson learned the hard way. It was a quiet Saturday night, the kind of night where everyone settled into their warm beds, lulled by the low hum of the streetlights outside. But in one seemingly peaceful neighborhood, 3 shadows crept through the darkness. Their hearts raced, not from fear, but from anticipation. Jake, the leader, twirled a crowbar in his hands, convinced that tonight would be their jackpot, an easy heist with little risk. "Stick to the plan," he whispered to his companions, Marcus and Leela. Leela nodded, the excitement lighting up her eyes. She always dreamed of thrills, of adrenaline coursing through her veins, and this was it. They had been watching this house for weeks, taking notes on the best time to strike. The lights were off, the neighborhood seemed deserted, and they figured it was the perfect opportunity to gather some easy cash. The lure of quick money was too tempting to resist. They approached the back door, crouching low in the shadows. As Jake used the crowbar to pry the door open, the creaking sound sent a chill down his spine, but he shrugged it off. "Just a little squeak," he murmured, forcing a grin. He slipped inside first, followed closely by Marcus and Leela. The moment they crossed the threshold, a wave of excitement washed over them. The dim light of the moon filtered through the curtains, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. They hadn't yet realized that their every movement could be heard in the night. Jake exclaimed, spotting a hallway that led deeper into the house. Each step echoed like a drumbeat, their own anticipation heightening their senses. With a feeling of invincibility, they moved methodically, looking for valuables. They ripped open drawers, scattered contents on the floor, their hearts pounding with excitement. In the living room, Marcus found a shiny laptop. He chuckled, clutching it close. But just then a noise caught their attention, a soft rustling. Their eyes shot toward the staircase leading to the upper floor. Anxiety gripped their hearts. Leela whispered, the bravado fading from her voice. "It's nothing," Jake insisted, but even he felt a prick of doubt. Instinctively, they turned toward the sound, the thrill of danger igniting their adrenaline once more. They hurriedly moved through the house, focusing on their mission, dismissing anything that didn't fit their expectations of a perfect heist. However, what they hadn't noticed was the faint glow of a security camera perched discreetly in the corner of the living room, silently recording their every move. The homeowner, Sarah, sat hundreds of miles away, watching a routine video feed of her home. She had installed the cameras after a series of burglaries in the neighborhood, determined to protect her sanctuary. When she saw the shadows through the screen, her heart dropped. She quickly grabbed her phone, trying to shake off the haze of disbelief. "Call the police. Hurry." The steps felt heavier than before, weighed down by fear and the instinct to protect her home. This wasn't just a property that was being violated, this was her safe space. While Jake and his crew continued their search, the dread of consequences nipped at their heels. Each creak of the floor made them jump. "We need to grab something big and go," Jake barked, trying to hold on to his confidence. Their plan had begun to unravel. They were losing precious time. Laughing nervously, Leela opened a cabinet and found some expensive-looking china. "We could sell these for a lot," she said, excitement bubbling into her voice. Just as she began to carefully lift a plate, a loud alarm started blaring, cutting through the silence like a bolt of thunder. The sound pierced through their exhilaration, replacing it with raw panic. Marcus shouted, his bravado shattered like glass. Leela shrieked back. The alarm continued to blare, filling the house with its deafening wail. In that chaotic moment, they could hear the distant sound of sirens approaching, echoing like a heartbeat racing towards their inevitable capture. "We need to get out," Jake yelled, his earlier confidence evaporating into thin air. They darted toward the back door, the panic intensifying each moment. But with the chaos of alarm bells ringing in the background, confusion filled their minds. Suddenly, Jake stumbled upon a vintage vase, the kind adorned with intricate designs and undoubtedly valuable. Something deep inside him hesitated. He argued, urgency mixed with greed surfacing. The reluctance held their escape in a vice grip. They looked down the hallway, the sirens growing steadily louder, a tantalizing reminder that freedom was slipping away. Marcus weighed his options, his breath quickening. "Dude, it's not worth it." He was beginning to realize how ridiculous they looked, not as thieves, but as people blindly grasping at straws in desperation. But Jake's eyes glinted with stubbornness. "You don't get it, this could set us up for life." Just as the air thickened with tension, footsteps echoed firmly outside the house. The officers were closing in, and Sarah, confident in her decision to protect her home, stood at her front door, ready to meet her intruders. Outside, 2 officers approached the house, their heavy footsteps mixing with the sound of the alarm. They were well trained, knowing how to handle situations like this. Startling lights began to flicker from their patrol car, illuminating the path before them and casting ominous shadows that danced on the walls of the house. Suddenly, the back door swung open just as Jake and Leela emerged. But instead of the freedom they so desperately craved, they stumbled right into the arms of 2 waiting officers. It was a scene pulled straight from a movie. Only this time, there were no heroes or escape artists, only 3 terrified individuals frozen in the face of their actions. One of the officers demanded, his voice steady and commanding. Jake stammered, his bravado crumbling like old bricks. Oui," he he stuttered, but the wild panic in his eyes gave away the truth. "Get on the ground." The officer shouted, and in that moment every ounce of bravado evaporated. The children who had once thought they were invincible now felt the crushing weight of reality. They knew they were caught. The thrill of the chase now morphed into the anxiety of consequence. As they complied, Sarah watched from the shadows, disbelief and relief swirling within her. She had never imagined her night would unfold in this way, yet something deep inside her felt a quiet assurance. She had taken steps to protect her home, and it had worked. Minutes later, the police wasted no time. Handcuffs clicked shut, encapsulating the intruders in cold metal. Alarm bells faded into the distance, leaving behind a haunting silence. Jake, Marcus, and Leela found themselves facing the undeniable truth. Their grasping hands had culminated in their own undoing. Inside the house, Sarah allowed herself a moment of reflection. She watched the officers escort the young thieves away, contemplating the fragile nature of trust and safety. It was difficult to be angry at them. They were not monsters, but misguided kids chasing after dreams cloaked in desperation. But dreams seldom come without a cost. "Unbelievably stupid," one officer muttered to himself, shaking his head as they led the trio outside. They thought it would be easy. A chill ran through the air as they were loaded into the police car. The comet of their poor choices had left a trail of consequences too heavy to bear. Jake, for all his bravado, sat silently, eyes lowered, facing the weight of reality. As the car pulled away, Sarah vacuumed the shards of her own disbelief. She had worked hard for her home and everything in it. This incident would serve as a stark reminder that safety isn't a given. It's something to protect, something to fight for. And as the sirens faded into the night, the neighborhood returned to its quiet hum, unaware of the consequences that had just unraveled. But deep in the hearts of those intruders, the bittersweet sting of lost opportunity echoed, a reminder that life is rarely what we expect it to be, often shaped by decisions and consequences that twist and turn in ways we cannot always comprehend. The young intruders had ventured forth with dreams of easy riches, only to find themselves captured by the very choices they had made. The thrill of the chase was over, replaced by the heavy burden of accountability. They had thought it would be easy to slip away unnoticed, but in the end, they learned that nothing truly valuable ever comes without a fight. It was a crisp fall evening when the shadows began their dance across the city streets. A perfect night for three young outsiders, whose dreams of easy riches were about to collide head-on with reality. They had spent weeks meticulously planning this job, convinced it would be a simple in and out, a heist that would set them up for life. But what they didn't know was that the night held more than just opportunity. Outside a modest suburban home, Jake, the ringleader, adjusted his cap. "All right, team, we stick to the plan. In 10 minutes, we're millionaires," he proclaimed, a glint of excitement igniting in his eyes. Leela and Marcus nodded, adrenaline pulsing through their veins. "Remember, no screwing around. We're professionals," Jake said, and the trio moved with quiet determination toward the back door. Each was caught in their own imagination, picturing how rich they'd soon be, oblivious to the dangers that lurked behind their bravado. As they approached the door, Jake glanced over his shoulder. He pulled out his crowbar and popped the lock with a satisfying click. The door creaked open, revealing a hallway that seemed to swallow them whole. The moment they stepped inside, the adrenaline buzzed in their ears, a chaotic symphony urging them on. The atmosphere of the house felt heavy, infused with the musty scent of old wood and memories. Dust motes floated in the scant light filtering through the curtains. They moved like shadows, slipping into the living room. The flickering light of a television reflected off the walls, casting eerie images that danced as if mocking their audacity. Leela exclaimed, her eyes widening as she spotted a sleek laptop sitting innocently on a coffee table. She grabbed it, feeling the weight of potential wealth in her hands. Marcus added, stuffing the laptop into his backpack. "Let's grab more but before he could finish his sentence, a noise erupted from the hallway, a soft creak followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. Panic gnawed at their insides. Leela whispered, her voice trembling. "Just a cat or something," Jake dismissed, though doubt flickered behind his bravado. A stillness hung in the air, broken only by their ragged breathing. They had not anticipated being disturbed, let alone someone finding them mid-crime. As if summoned, the footsteps drew nearer, resonating within the confines of the home. This was not in the plan. Jake's mind raced, weighing options, when suddenly the unmistakable sound of a door opening echoed down the hallway. Jake commanded, urging his friends toward the kitchen, but they were too late. Like a scene from a horror movie, a woman appeared at the end of the hallway, her presence imposing. Sarah, the homeowner, stood firm, her expression a mix of confusion and determination. She demanded, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. Years as a police officer had taught her to remain calm and assertive in moments of chaos. Jake's bravado faltered for just a moment, their eyes locking in a tense standoff. Panic and clarity collided as Jake took a step back, and for a split second they all hesitated, caught in a web of frozen fear. Marcus shouted, breaking the spell. He turned and sprinted toward the back door, but before he could escape, he was met with the blinding lights of a police car pulling up outside. The sirens wailed in a haunting harmony, slicing through the adrenaline-soaked air. The moment felt surreal. What had started as a foolproof plan crumbled into chaos. Leela hesitated, torn between flight and the reality crashing over her. Jake shot her a frantic glance, his bravado evaporating. They were cornered. He yelled, but Sarah had already reached for her phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. Each ring of the phone echoed like a countdown to disaster, and Jake realized that they were losing control. Just as they made their way toward the kitchen to find an escape route, Jake spotted a window. He shouted, leading the group toward it. But as they scrambled to open it, the sound of boots echoed outside, footsteps heading right for them. Leela hissed, her instincts kicking in. They ducked down behind the kitchen counter, hearts pounding in sync with the beeping of the doorbell that Sarah had accidentally triggered when she made the call. In that moment, hiding became a frantic game of survival. Jake's mind raced. "We're going to get caught," he whispered, looking at his friends, fear etched on their faces. The thrill of the heist had transformed into a nightmare. They had crossed a line, and now consequences loomed over them like a sword of Damocles. Outside, the police approached cautiously, their radios crackling to life. Unit 14 at the residence reported burglary in progress, one officer announced, and the tension seeped into the corners of the house. Sarah felt a surge of pride. She had taken her safety into her own hands. Inside, Jake grabbed Leela's arm, whispering, "I can't go to jail." Marcus shook his head, fear blending with clarity. "They'll just catch us." But Jake couldn't accept that. He was so caught up in his own fantasies of escape that he failed to see the reality unfolding. Just then the kitchen door creaked open and a figure appeared. An officer, flashlight aimed, scanned the room. Seconds seemed like hours, the kind of intense silence pregnant with dread. "Show me your hands." The officer barked, and the trio could feel the grip of dread tightening around them. Leela's heart hammered against her ribs. "We should surrender," she said, her voice barely audible over the racing pulse in her ears. In that moment, Jake's decision made itself. Without a word, he bolted from behind the island, only to find himself immediately eye-to-eye with two waiting officers. The realization crashed down like a heavy wave. One commanded, his eyes narrowing as Jake instinctively raised his hands. It was too late. Their wild dreams of fame and fortune had withered away in the bright lights of reality. Marcus was the next to make a move. In the chaos, he darted to the side, trying to bolt for the back door. But in a blink, another officer appeared, blocking his path. He skidded to a halt, the arrogance of a fool stripped away, leaving nothing but a scared kid caught in a bad situation. Leela trailed behind, her chest tightening with the weight of the moment. She could hear Sarah's frantic voice outside, now talking to the other officers, detailing what had transpired. This was no ordinary night. They were about to become the subjects of a story they never wanted to be a part of. As if reading their fate, Jake muttered, "We're screwed," and the weight of regret crashed down on them. There was no escape, no quick getaway. All that was left now was the dull silence of inevitability. With heavy hearts, they were handcuffed and escorted outside, the cool night air crashing into them, sharp and biting. The flashing lights of police cars lit up the street, illuminating their faces, which now wore expressions ranging from fear to resignation. The neighborhood had stirred, faces peering curiously from behind curtains. They would never forget the night 3 kids thought they could outsmart the universe. Sarah watched as they were led away, a mix of emotions swirling inside her: relief, anger, sadness. These were not hardened criminals but misguided youth, lost in a world that seemed so much bigger than they were. An officer walked over to her, offering a reassuring nod. "You did well, ma'am." Watching the intruders being loaded into the police car, Sarah felt a strange sense of closure. It was over, but it had come at a cost. Jake, Leela, and Marcus had their lives turned upside down in an attempt to take what wasn't theirs. As the car drove away, she couldn't shake the thought of their youth, their lost dreams, and the harsh reality that would cradle them in the days to come. Nothing would be easy anymore for them. Shadows of regret would loom over their choices. In a world painted with desperation, they had thought they could dance through the night, but the music had come to a screeching halt. The thrill of an easy payday had transformed into an indelible lesson, one that painted lives in shades of gray, a stark reminder that every choice carries consequences, and sometimes the price can be far sweeter than any riches they sought. Moments later, as the alarm faded into the night, a quiet resolution settled over the neighborhood. Sometimes safety doesn't come from avoiding trouble, but from knowing how to confront it when it comes knocking at your door. As ordinary lives resumed under the watchful glow of the streetlights, the tale of 3 intruders and their fate would echo through that community for years to come. A cautionary reminder of the night they thought it would be easy, but faced a truth they couldn't escape. The wind howled through the darkened streets, a ghostly whisper that wrapped around the houses like a shroud. It was a night like any other in the quiet suburb of Maplewood, but for 3 strangers lurking in the shadows, it was the perfect opportunity for a heist they believed would be a breeze. Jake, the ringleader, peered around the corner, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and trepidation. "Look at this place," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Easy pickings." Leela and Marcus exchanged glances, their eyes wide with both fear and anticipation. They had planned this for weeks, meticulously watching the house, noting when the occupants came and went, and now the moment was at hand. As they crept toward the back door, excitement coursed through their veins. But it was an excitement tinged with dread, the kind always present when flirting with danger. Jake pulled out a slim crowbar, the metallic glint catching the light for just a second. His hands trembled slightly, not because he was scared, but because this was it. This was the moment their lives would change. Jake whispered and the others nodded, caught in the thrall of the moment. The door creaked as he pried it open, a sound so loud in the still of the night it made their hearts skip. With each inch it moved, the thrill intensified, and finally it swung open, inviting them in. The living room was dimly lit by a street lamp's glow, casting eerie silhouettes across the furniture. Dust danced in the air, untouched for far too long. This was a place filled with memories, now the backdrop for their leap into crime. They moved cautiously, their senses heightened. Leela spotted a sleek television, its screen dark and inviting, and gasped. She said, her excitement bubbling. Jake snapped, urgency creeping into his tone. They scattered like leaves in the wind. Marcus headed to the kitchen, his eyes darting nervously around every corner. He opened a drawer and rummaged through utensils, finding nothing but old knives and forks. Meanwhile, Jake found himself in the study, where shelves lined with dusty books and framed photos told the story of a family's life. He felt a twinge of guilt but squashed it down. In his mind, this was a victimless crime. The owners wouldn't even miss a few things, right? Marcus called from the kitchen, frustration etched on his face. Leela rushed over, curiosity overtaking her worry. She was normally the cautious one, but tonight felt different. This was her chance to break free from her mundane life. They began tossing things around, searching for valuables, unaware that a heavy shadow loomed at the edge of the street. The homeowner, Sarah, had been watching through her security cameras, her heart racing as she saw the strange figures. In a matter of moments, she would take action, as she had learned in her past as a police officer. Sitting at her kitchen table, Sarah glanced at the time and frowned. It was much too late for visitors. Her instinct kicked in. She reached for her phone and dialed 911. The operator's calm voice soothed her as she whispered her address, her pulse quickening with each passing second. Back inside, the intruders were caught up in their frenzy, laughter escaping their lips, a strange mix of anxiety and exhilaration propelling them forward. Jake had found an expensive-looking watch and could barely contain his excitement. "This is perfect," he shouted, waving it above his head like a trophy. But as the words left his mouth, the distant sound of sirens began to echo, gradually growing louder. No one else seemed to notice, but the shift in the room felt palpable. The air crackled with tension. Leela's voice trembled, her earlier bravado disappearing. "It's nothing, just a car," Jake insisted, clutching the watch as if it were lifeline. But the sirens grew closer, morphing from distant wails into the reality looming beyond the walls of that house. Just then, a loud crash made them all jump. Jake fumbled, dropping the watch as the front door burst open, not by them, but by an officer who had arrived in response to that 911 call. "Police!" The officer yelled, his flashlight piercing through the dark, illuminating their shocked faces. Time slowed to a crawl. The adrenaline that had fueled them moments before was replaced with sheer terror. Jake's eyes darted around, searching for an escape, but there was none. They were trapped. He screamed, and for the first time he felt the weight of his decisions pressing down like a heavy fog. They dashed for the back door, but more flashing lights filled the yard, the red and blue mingling with the moonlight. The last vestiges of bravado vanished in an instant. Reality was now crashing down around them. In a split second, they realized that every hoped-for escape route was blocked by officers closing in around the perimeter of the house. Their wild fantasies of wealth were collapsing into dark, grim reality. Marcus cried out, panic trembling in his voice. They huddled together, breaths coming quick and heavy. "We should just give up," Leela said, her voice barely a whisper. The fight that had spurred them on was now extinguished, replaced by fear, helplessness, and regret. But Jake didn't want to accept defeat. He shouted, "We can't go to jail." Just then, the officer who had entered the house reached them, his approach steady and unyielding. With two more officers flanking him, there was nowhere to run. The trio stood frozen as the weight of their choices washed over them. Just moments ago, they had envisioned a life of freedom filled with cash and treasures. Now the reality was stark, oppressive. The officer raised his voice, commanding them to the ground. Overwhelmed by the moment, they dropped to their knees, the taste of dirt mixed with the salt of their own regrets. Handcuffs clicked around their wrists, locking away their dreams along with their hopes of escape. The thrill of the chase was replaced by the crushing weight of accountability. Sarah emerged from her place of hiding, eyes wide with disbelief. Nothing about her evening had prepared her for this moment. She saw the trio, young and scared, and her mind flooded with questions. Had it really come to this? As the officers began to conduct their questioning, she felt a mix of conflicting emotions. Anger bubbled alongside pity. These were kids, barely adults, yet they had made choices that painted them into a corner. One officer asked, staring at Jake with a steely gaze, "It was supposed to be easy, we thought. We thought we could just take a few things," Jake stammered, a sense of shame swirling in his chest. The bravado he'd clung to only minutes before had evaporated, leaving behind a fragile facade. Sarah stepped forward, her heart aching for what these kids had thrown away. "This isn't just about things, you know. You've shattered lives and trust." In that moment, for the first time, they were challenged to confront the impact of their actions. Leela looked at Sarah, tears welling in her eyes. "We didn't think. We thought it would be easy," she confessed, her voice breaking. But the moment of vulnerability was tinged with bitterness. You can't just take what isn't yours. Those easy choices come with consequences. "Look where that's led you." Sarah's voice was steady, but her heart felt heavy watching them grapple with reality. In the shifting shadows beneath the streetlights, Jake and the others finally felt the hard truth settle in. That life isn't a game and choices are not watchwords. They had chased after a fleeting dream, only to find themselves cornered and vulnerable. As the police car pulled up, they felt the weight of their decisions lock into place. One officer led them toward the backseat, gently but firmly, while Sarah stood back, absorbing the moment. As the door closed behind them, she realized this wasn't just about a crime. This was a young life taking a wrong turn, desperately seeking something more only to find emptiness. The car departed, lights flashing through the night, a beacon not of hope but of the cold glare of justice. The neighborhood returned to its hushed soundtrack of crickets and the whispering wind. Sarah watched the car disappear, contemplating the thin line between right and wrong, the frail nature of dreams when dipped in desperation. In the days that followed, news spread through the neighborhood. But while many saw the trio as criminals, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were just lost kids seeking something they didn't know how to find. The images replayed in her mind: Jake's bravado, Leela's uncertainty, and Marcus's fear. She thought about resilience and redemption, the lessons that often come from the harshest of experiences. Maybe, just maybe, some of them could learn to find a new path from this experience, one where the easy way could transform into something meaningful, a path filled with value. Jake, Leela, and Marcus were not just criminals. They were the embodiment of choices made in the heat of the moment. Their decisions served as a thread woven into the rich tapestry of life's complexity. As Sarah lay in bed that night, sleep eluded her, but she had a newfound understanding, a belief in the possibility of change. Maybe, instead of forever carrying shame, they could turn this moment into something powerful, something that taught them about responsibility, empathy, and redemption. And as the moon cast a silvery glow over Maplewood, the shadows began to recede, leaving behind a lesson embodied in the night. Sometimes, what seems easy can lead to the hardest of lessons, reminding us all that the choices we make echo beyond our immediate desires, shaping the lives we lead. The houses stood quiet in the moonlight, a peaceful facade hiding the stories within. On one such night in a neighborhood that held secrets of its own, 3 shadows crept toward the back of a home. For Jake, Leela, and Marcus, this was not just another night. It was their night to strike it rich. They thought it would be easy. "Just grab what you can and let's get out," Jake whispered, excitement crackling in his voice. He felt invincible, buoyed by the thrill of the hunt. They had been planning this heist for weeks, mapping out every detail. How silly it would be, he thought, to underestimate their skills. As they approached the rear door, the faint scent of fresh grass wafted through the air, but to them it mingled with the heady aroma of possibility. Running his fingers down the crowbar, Jake felt an electric thrill surge through him. This was it. Their lives were about to change. He shoved the crowbar into the doorframe, the metallic screech echoing unnervingly in the stillness. With one swift motion, the door creaked open, revealing a shadowy interior. Each of them took a breath and then they slipped inside. The living room was dark, lit only by the flickering light of a street lamp outside. Dust motes danced in the air. Looking around, Leela felt a small shiver of apprehension. "This feels wrong," she muttered, but the thrill of the moment overshadowed her instinct. Jake shrugged off her discomfort. "It's too late to back out now." He moved further into the house, eyes darting around, taking in the scattered furniture and unkempt rooms. This was their chance for a life less ordinary. Marcus lagged behind, kicked down by a lingering doubt. "We should just grab the easy stuff and go," he said nervously. But Jake had other plans. They continued their search, hearts racing with ambition. In the kitchen, Marcus began rifling through drawers, tossing aside old utensils. He said, holding up a very old, rusted toaster. Jake snapped, growing impatient. The longer they stayed, the more the weight of their choice pressed on his shoulders. Leela checked the living room. A twinge of anxiety sparked in Leela's chest, but she nodded. She sifted through a few items on the living room table, a few old magazines and a dusty picture frame. She felt a rush of greed as she imagined finding something worth selling. Meanwhile, upstairs, Jake pushed open a door to the master bedroom. It was littered with clothes and personal belongings. "This is the gold mine," he whispered to himself, already picturing the treasures he would find. He opened a drawer and began pulling out jewelry, each piece ringing with the promise of cash. Just as he stuffed a heavy necklace into his pocket, he heard a slow creaking sound from the hallway. A chill crept down his spine. He rushed to the doorway, peering out into the dim hallway. Was that a shadow flickering in the light? He called out. Leela's voice trembled as she replied, "Yeah, I did." Suddenly, the loud sound of a door crashing open echoed through the house. Panic surged as a voice barked from somewhere in the distance. Police. Time froze. The intruders felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath them. Jake's bravado evaporated. "We need to get out," he shouted. They scrambled, heartbeats racing like a runaway train, but reality tugged on their sleeves, reminding them they were not alone. As they tore down the hallway, Leela's stomach twisted. Jake pointed to a small window at the end of the corridor, and they all dashed toward it. But fate had different plans. The police officer rounded the corner, cutting them off before they could make their escape. The officer commanded, flashlight beams sweeping over them like a predator. Jake thought of wrestling the officer, but a flicker of sanity stopped him. They were trapped. The choices they'd made collided with the harshness of reality, and in that moment they felt vulnerable, exposed. The officer yelled, taking a cautious step forward. With hearts thundering like drums, they fell to their knees. The world around them blurred as they waited for the cold grip of handcuffs. Leela's breath hitched in her throat, the weight of their choices pressing heavily down on her. As the officer secured the cuffs, Jake's mind raced. They had come here thinking it would be easy, to grab what they wanted and disappear like shadows in the night. But instead, a police car awaited them outside, the blue and red lights flashing like a harsh reminder of their naivety. At that moment, Sarah, the homeowner, appeared, her eyes wide with disbelief. She had been alerted by her security system, but nothing could prepare her for the sight of these three young intruders. She asked, her voice laced with a mix of anger and pity. Jake looked up at her, a rush of shame flooding through him. We just wanted to get something easy," he stammered, the bravado fading into embarrassment. Sarah shook her head. Each of them hung their heads, guilt pooling in their chests. The excitement they once felt now lay shattered on the ground like the glass from a broken window. The officer began gathering their information, but the emotional weight was piercing through Jake and his friends. "I thought it would be easy," Leela finally admitted, tears glistening in her eyes. "And now look where easy has gotten us," Marcus added, feeling the remorse wrap around his heart like a vice. They had believed they were above the consequences, living in a thrill that would unravel within seconds. As they were led out to the waiting police car, Jake caught Sarah's gaze. He felt a surge of empathy, but also the realization that their choices had consequences far beyond what they understood. He asked hesitantly. "You'll have to face the music," she replied, her voice softer now. "But this can also be a turning point. You can learn and change." The officers helped them into the backseat, each waiting with anticipation for what lay ahead. The fear gripped them tightly, but beneath it lay a flicker of potential, a challenge to rise above what they thought was impossible. As the police car pulled away, the reality of their situation set in. They would face charges, court, and perhaps even a life touched by consequences. But alongside that fear lingered the possibility of change, a chance to find redemption along the path of regret. In the days that followed, news of the attempted burglary spread rather quickly. People discussed the incident around town, some showing sympathy toward the intruders, while others expressed disdain. "Kids these days don't know how to work hard for what they want," some would say, while others pondered how they could help the trio learn a different way. Sarah found herself reflecting on her encounter with them. Instead of just anger, a mix of compassion and hope washed over her. She understood what it was like to feel desperate, to want to escape the mundane grind of life. The world could be heavy, and she felt a connection to these kids, who were simply searching for a shortcut to happiness. Weeks later, Jake, Leela, and Marcus stood in front of a judge. The courtroom felt foreign to them, a chilling reminder that their recklessness had consequences. As they listened to their charges, each felt the weight of regret tighten around them. But the judge saw more than just three young people who tried to slip into someone else's life. "This is a chance for growth," she said, her voice steady. "You can learn from this. You will serve community service and attend counseling sessions." Jake couldn't believe it. They had come seeking quick rewards, but instead left with the opportunity for real change. It was hard to swallow at first, but slowly, the idea took root within him. What if he could do something good, something that created value without taking from others? Over the following months, the trio dedicated their time to helping at local shelters, participating in workshops on responsibility and decision-making. They shared their story, became part of the community, and gradually transformed the shame into empowerment. In another twist of fate, Sarah volunteered at a local event and was surprised to see them there, willing to help. She approached them, heart swelling with pride. "I never expected to see you all here," she said, sincerity ringing in her words. "Thank you," Jake replied, a newfound strength in his voice. Days turned into months, and slowly the shadow of their past began to fade away. While they could never erase what they had done, they found chances to rebuild. Each shift of their choices brought about a shift in their lives. They learned that true fulfillment didn't come from shortcuts, but from the sweat and growth they dedicated to the path ahead. In time, they discovered that every stumble could lead to a lesson if they were willing to learn. And as they moved through life, they embraced the complexities of their new reality, empowered to walk a road paved with resilience. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues across the sky, they stood firm, proud of who they had become, not just survivors of their choices, but active participants in the life they were determined to create. What began that fateful night as a pursuit of ease transformed into a journey of understanding, showing that sometimes life's greatest lessons come from our hardest falls. They had thought it would be easy, but they learned that real growth often hides behind the most difficult paths. And now they were ready to embrace every twist and turn along the way. It was a still night in a quiet neighborhood where the moon hung high, illuminating the streets like a spotlight on a stage. Yet in the dark corners, three figures slinked through the shadows, plotting their next move with the confidence of seasoned pros. Little did they know, their ambitious plans were about to unravel. Jake, the ringleader with a glint in his eye, felt a rush of adrenaline as they approached their target, a seemingly ordinary house nestled between two tall oaks. "This is it, guys. Easy pickings." "In and out before anyone even knows we're here," he whispered, barely containing his excitement. Leela and Marcus, his friends and accomplices for the night, exchanged nervous glances but nodded, caught up in Jake's bravado. The thrill of the unknown hung in the air, intoxicating and dangerous. Jake pulled out a slim crowbar, its metal glimmering under the pale moonlight. "Here goes nothing," he said, and with a heave, he pried open the back door. It creaked loudly, echoing in the stillness, causing all three of them to pause momentarily, their hearts pounding. But the temptation of easy riches drowned out any moment of doubt. They slipped inside, hearts racing. The dim light of the living room illuminated a nostalgic scene. Old family photos adorned the walls, remnants of laughter and warmth. But for Jake, Leela, and Marcus, this was a mere backdrop. They were not here for memories, they were here for valuables. "Let's split up." "I'll check the kitchen," Marcus said, his voice tinged with uncertainty but bolstered by the promise of quick gains. He dashed off, quickly swallowed by the shadows. Jake moved toward the living room, scanning for anything worth taking. His eyes roamed over a sleek gaming console and a couple of smartphones left casually on the couch. He exclaimed, reaching for them just as Leela walked in from the hallway. She asked, unable to hide her excitement. Jake said, displaying his finds like trophies. But the gleam of the screens was quickly overshadowed by a sudden noise, a soft crunch from the back door they had entered. Leela asked, anxiety creeping into her voice. Jake snapped, peering into the dimness behind him. Fear wrapped its cold fingers around their hearts as they exchanged worried glances. But Jake brushed it off, convincing himself that they had all the time in the world. Just some wind, right? But that's when it happened. The unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed through the house, slow and deliberate. The trio froze, their blood turning to ice. The thrill of the heist quickly transformed into a chilling dread. Marcus's voice quavered as he stepped back from the kitchen, eyes wide. Jake hissed, glancing toward the hallway that led to the front of the house. Leela's heart raced as she instinctively moved closer to Jake. She whispered. Panic washed over her as her mind raced with the implications. This was supposed to be easy, an escape from their mundane lives. Instead, they were just kids caught in a mess that could cost them everything. Jake made a split-second decision. We can't get caught. They all turned on their heels, sprinting toward the kitchen. But before they could reach the exit, the front door burst open. "Police!" A voice boomed, echoing through the rooms. They skidded to a stop. The flashlights from the officers outside pierced through the darkness, illuminating their wide eyes brimming with fear. In that moment, the adrenaline that once propelled them forward now acted as a heavy anchor, dragging them down. Marcus's instincts kicked in. He bolted toward the back door, but Jake grabbed him by the arm, pulling him back. "Stop! There's no way out." Jake knew that resisting was futile, but the raw desire to escape still coursed through his veins. Their world, once filled with potential riches, had spiraled into confusion and panic. Another officer shouted as more appeared from the shadows, their steps behind them echoing like a countdown to disaster. Leela dropped to her knees, shaking uncontrollably. "I can't believe this is happening," she gasped as the weight of their actions crashed down around them. Marcus shouted, fear turning his voice to a frantic cry. The harsh reality of the situation gripped them tight. They hadn't even made it past the entryway, and already the dreams of easy money lay shattered at their feet. As they complied with the officer's orders, the door swung wide open and two uniformed officers stepped inside, flashlights sweeping the rooms. The bright light made the shadows dance, throwing their panic into stark relief. One officer barked, approaching with an unwavering gaze. The tension felt thick, almost suffocating. Leela could feel her heart racing, a rapid drum echoing through the silence. They were nobody's heroes. They were just scared kids caught in a tangled web of their own making. The other officer moved in, handcuffs already glinting in the darkness. "You're under arrest for burglary," he stated matter-of-factly. As each of them felt the cold metal click around their wrists, Jake's bravado crumbled. The fantasy of wealth and excitement faded into a stark, terrifying reality. They would not just be marked by one bad choice. Their lives could be forever altered by one foolish night. They were led outside, where the bright lights of police cars flashed against the darkness, illuminating the faces of neighbors peering through their curtains, curious and shocked. Sarah, the homeowner, stood among them, emotion swirling in her chest as she tried to reconcile what she just witnessed. "Please, don't take them away," she called out, her heart heavy. She thought of her own children, recalling the moments when they too had acted foolishly, blinded by youthful ambition. But the officers acted with professionalism, ignoring her pleas. They guided the trio to the back of the cruiser, where they were forced to sit and absorb what had just transpired. Jake couldn't meet Leela's eyes. "I thought we'd get away with it," he murmured, shaking his head in disbelief, panic sparking wild thoughts of their future. "It was supposed to be easy," Leela echoed, tears streaming down her cheeks. I just wanted to feel alive." The incipient weight of regret suffocated them. They could have been at home, safe in bed, but now they sat surrounded by harsh lights, the world's expectations pressing heavily on their shoulders. As the officer began to take their statements, Sarah stepped forward, finding the courage to speak. "I know you're scared, but you all have a choice," she said, her voice steady. "This doesn't have to be your future. You can learn from this." Jake looked up, holding Sarah's gaze, a mix of anger and guilt wrestling within him. He burst out, frustration pouring from his lips. "I can," Sarah replied, softness cutting through her firmness. "But it's up to you to take this moment and make something of it." In that instant, something shifted within Jake. Her words lingered in the air, pulling him from the haze of despair. He had felt the rush of greed, the lure of an easy escape, and now he was confronted with the possibility of a different path, one that could lead him away from this spiral of bad choices. As the officers finished taking their statements, the reality of what lay ahead started to settle in. They would face charges, possibly community service, maybe even counseling. But beneath their fear lay the kernel of hope. Sarah had offered a chance to make a better choice. The days turned into weeks, and the trio surfaced from the wreckage of that night. They found themselves in court, facing a judge who studied them with keen eyes. "You've made a grave mistake," the judge stated. Jake and his friends listened, the truth resonating deep within them. They were given an opportunity to prove that they could change, to show the world that they were more than just the sum of their poor choices. And as they embarked on their community service, the weight of each decision began to shift. They worked at shelters, discussed their experiences in workshops, and turned their fear into motivation. With every act of kindness, they chipped away at the shadow that hung over them, slowly redefining themselves. Jake began to think differently. Each time he reached out to help someone, he felt a spark igniting within him. He might have thought this path would be easy, but it was the hard work that began to feel truly rewarding. The nights grew shorter and weeks turned into months. They were surprised by the changes they felt within themselves. Leela, once caught in uncertainty, found confidence working with fellow volunteers. Marcus discovered his voice, sharing their story with others who might be tempted to follow the same reckless path. As they pressed forward, the yearning for easy fortune faded away. The lessons they learned became the foundation of their lives, building blocks of resilience. They discovered that with every little choice, they shaped their future. And on a night much like the one that had started it all, filled with stillness and moonlight, they gathered together outside, perhaps for the first time truly reflecting on their journey. Jake asked, looking up at the stars, the weight of regret replaced with something lighter. "Yeah," Leela said with a smile, "but it's not where we are now." Marcus nodded, joy lighting up his face. "We turned it around. They had thought it would be easy, but instead, they found something far more valuable, the power to change their narrative and write a different ending." This journey from darkness to light echoed deep within them as they carved their new paths, hand in hand, free from the chains of their past. And as the moon shone down upon them, they felt alive, not because they had sought something easy, but because they had faced their fears and emerged stronger. The night that began with chaos transformed into a hopeful journey, proving that sometimes the hardest paths lead to the most profound destinations. The night was draped in darkness, but the moon hung like a watchful eye over the quiet suburban streets. Inside a seemingly innocuous home, the faint sound of a television flickered in the background, casting shadows across the walls. But outside, 3 figures lurked, adrenaline coursing through their veins, their minds racing with thoughts of quick scores and easy exits. Ethan, the leader of the trio, peered through the bush that masked them from view. "This is it," he whispered, his voice low but charged with excitement. 5 minutes in and we're gone. Lily and Jake exchanged nervous glances. They had been enticed by the allure of easy money, the fantasy of wealth dancing in their minds like fireflies. Lily asked, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan snapped, impatience simmering just below the surface. "There's no one home." He felt invincible. This was their chance to escape the monotony of their lives, to become legends of the night. With a sinking heart, Lily shrugged off her doubts and nodded. They crawled to the back door, and Ethan produced a small crowbar. The old wooden door creaked ominously as he forced it open, revealing a dark hallway. Shadows danced along the walls like ghosts, and for a moment all 3 of them felt a twinge of fear. But that fear was quickly overwhelmed by the thrill of the hunt. As they stepped inside, a heavy silence enveloped them, broken only by the muffled sounds of the television. It seemed almost surreal, as if they had crossed into another world. "Quickly," Ethan urged, his eyes gleaming with greed. He led the charge, moving swiftly despite the apprehension gnawing at his insides. The overstuffed couch and coffee table told stories of cozy family nights, but all they saw were untapped resources. In the corner of the room, a sleek gaming console caught his eye. He exclaimed, snatching it up and shoving it into his backpack. It felt good, the thrill of the catch, but just then, a strange sense of unease crept back into the atmosphere. "Ethan, we should hurry," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper as he rifled through the drawers. He grabbed a stack of old games and shoved them into his bag. Ethan shouted, brushing off the caution. But as they moved further into the house, the sound of their own breath felt deafening. The rest of the house loomed before them like a labyrinth, an uncharted territory filled with hidden treasures and potential dangers. Then came the sound, a sharp crack from behind them. They froze. Lily breathed, eyes wide. "Just the wind," Ethan dismissed, trying to shake off the unease gripping their hearts. But deep down, an instinct told him they were being watched. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled. Jake asked, glancing nervously toward the back door they had entered. "Are you kidding?" Ethan urged, more determined than ever. But doubt settled in as he realized the irony of their situation. They were the intruders, yet he felt as though they were the ones being hunted. As they moved deeper into the house, Jake dug through a pile of old video games, his fingers brushing over worn cases. Each moment stretched out like an eternity, the thrill of the potential score mingling with a growing tension in the air. Whispers of sound drifted from the kitchen, a scraping noise that made them freeze in their tracks. With hearts racing, they looked at one another. Lily asked suddenly, "What? No," Ethan exclaimed, his bravado beginning to unravel. Before they could gather their thoughts, footsteps came closer, heavy and deliberate. It sounded like someone was walking through the halls, and in an instant the illusion of safety shattered. Jake hissed, ducking behind a couch, and the others followed suit. The footsteps grew louder, approaching the living room. Shadows passed in the flickering light, and panic surged through them. Lily whispered, her voice trembling. They huddled together, hoping to melt into the upholstery. Adrenaline coursed through their veins as they tried to stifle their breaths, but every heartbeat sounded like thunder. They watched as a figure appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the light of the kitchen. A woman stood there tall, with an aura of authority that sent a shiver down Ethan's spine. She called, her voice steady and firm. The forcefulness in her tone sent a jolt through all of them. She asked again, a slight edge of concern creeping into her voice. Ethan exchanged looks with Jake and Lily. They were petrified, caught between the reality of their situation and the raw instinct to flee. Suddenly, all bravery shattered as the woman stepped further into the room. "I know someone's in here," she demanded, and the trio knew they could no longer remain hidden. In a heartbeat, the illusion of their bold plans crumbled and instinct took over. Jake shouted as he bolted to the back door, shoving it open with all his might. But it was too late. They didn't have a moment to breathe before the distant sound of sirens split the air, growing louder and louder like the harbinger of doom. The woman raised her phone, frantically dialing for help. "Get out!" Ethan screamed, and they scrambled for the back door, momentum driving them forward. But once again, the crushing reality of their predicament pressed down on them as they saw patrol cars pull up outside. With nowhere to run and nowhere to hide, they were caught in the open. The sirens blared as the flashing lights invaded the night, a cacophony of chaos that intensified their panic. They had thought it would be easy, but now everything was spiraling out of control. One officer commanded as they approached, voices booming, commanding, cutting through their desperation. Jake stumbled and fell, his hands hitting the ground hard. The weight of betrayal crushed him as he turned to see Ethan and Lily paralyzed with fear. The chilling realization set in. They were the ones being hunted, and there was no escape. The officers shouted, their voices blending into an authoritative roar that filled the air. Trembling, Jake felt the heavy chains of regret pull him down. He never imagined the thrill of easy would lead to this moment, where the possibility of freedom slipped through his fingers. One by one, they were captured, the cold grip of handcuffs fastening around their wrists. The world outside, once filled with dreams of fortune, had become a nightmare woven into the fabric of reality. Lily cried, her voice laced with desperation, but it was too late. They were now prisoners of their own making, the price of their choices crashing down on them like a tidal wave. As the officers escorted them to the waiting police car, Sarah the homeowner stood frozen, her heart heavy. She had never expected something like this to happen, but their faces were a painful reminder of the choices made in the heat of the moment. She shouted, but there was no anger in her words, only disbelief and sorrow. Jake stood, gazing at her, his heart sinking. "We thought it would be easy," he muttered, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. "You thought wrong," Sarah replied, shaking her head, her voice calm but filled with a fierce protectiveness. "You could have hurt people. You took a risk that had consequences." As they were loaded into the cruiser, Jake caught a glimpse of their lives flashing before him, the consequences of their actions enveloping him in a suffocating embrace. Moments later, as the car doors slammed shut, he realized they were trapped in a narrative they had written with their own hands. Their dreams of quick money had turned into a lesson in reality, one they couldn't escape. With police lights flashing behind them, illuminating the darkened streets, they could see their futures shifting before their eyes like sand slipping through an hourglass. Then it happened. One of the officers leaned into the driver's seat, appearing rattled. "We've got a code red," he barked into the radio. "We need backup," shots fired at the corner of Elm and Maple. The atmosphere changed in an instant, tension crackling like static in the air. Jake's heart raced. He asked, panic creeping back in. "There's been an incident nearby," the officer replied tersely. Glancing back toward the cruiser, they quickly keyed in commands. Their prior focus shifted. In the confusion, Jake felt a flicker of hope. He whispered to Lily and Marcus, who looked at him wide-eyed. Lily hissed, fear mounting. Ethan's heart raced with conflicting emotions. They were trapped, but perhaps this was their only chance, a fleeting moment in time where everything could change. Then, with a suddenness that took them all by surprise, the back door swung open, an officer emerging to respond to the commotion. The officer shouted, his attention diverted. For a split second, the grip of their fate released just enough. Jake seized the moment, adrenaline surging, drowning out his rational thoughts. He shouted, flinging himself toward the gap, bolting through the open door. Lily and Marcus followed, heart pounding and fear igniting their instincts as they scrambled out into the night. The sounds of chaos from the street rang in their ears, offering them a desperate chance at escape. But as they sprinted into the haze of confusion, they had no idea how much their lives would change around them. The choice they made in that moment would lead them to places they had never anticipated. With pounding hearts, they pushed forward into the darkness, unaware of the dangers that awaited them just around the corner. As the night sky swallowed them whole, the shadows felt less like a refuge and more like predators on their heels. Now, faced with the unknown and the haunting realization of their choices, they raced ahead, not just from the cops, but from the very shadows of themselves they had created that fateful night. And just as they thought they were disappearing into safety, the sound of a gunshot rang out in the distance, echoing through the night, a harbinger of fate that would pull them into the chaos of a much larger story than they ever intended to become part of.